I stared in disbelief as Tate casually zipped up his suitcase, his nonchalant attitude infuriating me. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Your mother's condition is critical, and you're just leaving for a business trip?" Tate barely glanced up, his cold eyes meeting mine briefly. "Hallie, we've been over this. This deal in Florida is too important to pass up. Mom's in good hands at the rehabilitation center." I clenched my fists, struggling to contain my rage. How could he be so callous? For months, I'd been the one visiting Marlene daily, ensuring she received the care and affection she deserved, while he remained consumed by his work. "You know she's not just Mom to me," I said, my voice growing louder. "She's my family, too, and she needs us now more than ever. But you don't seem to care at all." Tate sighed, shouldering his bag. "Don't be so dramatic. The doctor said she's stable for now. I'll be back in a week." As he moved past me towards the door, I couldn't stay silent any longer. "That's it? That's all you have to say?" I shouted, the anger boiling over. "You're a selfish, uncaring son, and I'm sick of making excuses for you." Tate paused, his lips curling into a smug smile that only fueled my fury. "Careful, Hallie, you're starting to sound like a nagging wife." In that moment, something snapped inside me. I wouldn't stand idly by while he neglected his own mother, the woman who had welcomed me into her family with open arms. As he disappeared out the door, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. Tate would pay for his indifference, one way or another. The seeds of my plan had already begun to take root, fueled by the anger and disappointment I felt towards the man I had once loved. I would make him see the error of his ways, no matter what it took. The rehabilitation center's sterile hallways seemed to stretch endlessly as I made my way to Marlene's room. My anger towards Tate had only intensified since his callous departure, fueling my determination to seek justice for his mother. As I entered the room, Marlene's tired eyes lit up, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Hallie, dear, it's so good to see you." I leaned down and gently embraced her, trying to push away the storm of emotions swirling within me. "How are you feeling today, Marlene?" She let out a soft sigh, her frail hand patting mine. "I'm hanging in there, sweetheart. The nurses have been taking good care of me." Guilt tugged at my heart. If only Tate could show a fraction of the care and devotion I felt for this remarkable woman. I forced a smile, determined not to burden her with my troubles. "I'm glad to hear that," I said, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Have you had any visitors today?" Marlene's expression grew somber. "No, it's just been me and the nurses. You know how busy Tate is with his work." I bit back a scathing remark, not wanting to upset her further. Instead, I reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "Don't worry, Marlene. I'm here for you, always." A glimmer of appreciation shone in her eyes, and she nodded gratefully. As our conversation drifted to more light-hearted topics, I found myself distracted by a folder on her bedside table. Curiosity got the better of me, and I discreetly slid it towards me. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the words "Last Will and Testament" printed on the cover. Without thinking, I flipped it open, my eyes scanning the pages in disbelief. "Marlene," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "why does this will state that you're leaving everything to me?" She paused, her gaze steady and resolute. "Because you've been the one truly caring for me, Hallie, not Tate." Tears stung my eyes as the weight of her words sank in. Marlene trusted me, valued me, in a way her own son didn't. A surge of determination coursed through me. I would make sure Tate paid dearly for his neglect. "Thank you, Marlene," I whispered, squeezing her hand tightly. "I promise. I'll take care of everything." As I left the center that day, my mind was already whirring with plans. Tate's indifference would be his downfall, and I would stop at nothing to ensure he faced the consequences of his actions. In the days following my discovery of Marlene's will, a fire ignited within me, fueling my determination to expose Tate's true nature. I knew I needed irrefutable evidence of his neglect, something that would shatter any illusion of devotion he tried to maintain. The first step was installing hidden cameras in Marlene's room at the rehabilitation center. With the help of a tech-savvy friend, I strategically placed the tiny devices, ensuring they captured every angle. I would document Tate's indifference firsthand. As the days ticked by, the footage painted a damning picture. Tate's visits were few and far between, often lasting mere minutes before he rushed off, citing work commitments. On the rare occasion he did linger, his disinterest was palpable, scrolling through his phone or making hasty exits whenever Marlene attempted conversation. But the true depths of his callousness became apparent during one particularly painful incident. Marlene had fallen ill, her condition deteriorating rapidly. The nurses had called me in a panic, urging me to come quickly. When I arrived, flustered and terrified, I found Marlene writhing in agony, her face contorted in pain. The nurses informed me they had tried contacting Tate repeatedly, but he hadn't answered. "Where is he?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fury. "This is his own mother." The nurse's expression was one of resignation. "We haven't been able to reach him, Miss Jensen. He's not answering our calls." In that moment, something inside me snapped. I would make Tate answer for this, no matter what it took. Over the next few weeks, I meticulously gathered testimonies from the nurses and caregivers, documenting every instance of Tate's negligence. Their accounts painted a damning picture, a son so consumed by his own ambitions that he had abandoned his ailing mother. With each new piece of evidence, my resolve only grew stronger. Tate would face the consequences of his actions, even if I had to drag him kicking and screaming into the harsh light of truth. As I reviewed the footage and statements, a plan began to form in my mind, a reckoning that would leave no doubt as to the depths of Tate's indifference, and when the time came, I would be ready to strike. The sharp trill of my phone cut through the silence, and I glanced at the caller ID with a mix of trepidation and hope. It was the rehabilitation center. Taking a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself for whatever news awaited. "Miss Jensen?" The nurse's voice was tinged with excitement. "You'll never believe it. Marlene's condition has improved dramatically over the past few days. The doctors say her recovery is nothing short of miraculous." A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a surge of determination. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for, a chance to make Tate face the consequences of his neglect once and for all. "That's wonderful news," I replied, already formulating my plan. "When can I bring Marlene home?" The nurse's voice brightened. "The doctors have given the all clear. She's ready for discharge whenever you're able to pick her up." "Perfect. I'll be there as soon as I can." Hanging up the phone, I wasted no time. I gathered the evidence I had meticulously compiled, the damning footage, the nurse's testimonies, every shred of proof of Tate's indifference. With Marlene by my side, we would confront him together, leaving him no room for excuses or lies. When I arrived at the center, Marlene was already waiting in the lobby, her vibrant smile a stark contrast to the frail woman I had grown accustomed to seeing. She embraced me tightly, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Hallie," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for never giving up on me." I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You don't need to thank me, Marlene. I'm just glad you're feeling better." As we made our way to my car, I couldn't help but notice the renewed strength in Marlene's step. It was as if her determination had reignited, fueling her recovery. And in that moment, I knew she was ready to face her son's cruelty head-on. Once we were settled in my apartment, I wasted no time in laying out the evidence I had gathered. Marlene's expression hardened as she watched the footage, her jaw clenching with each new instance of Tate's neglect. "That heartless boy," she muttered, her voice trembling with anger. "How could he treat his own mother this way?" I reached out and clasped her hand in mine, my gaze unwavering. "We're going to make him pay, Marlene, together." A determined glint shone in her eyes, and she nodded resolutely. "Whatever it takes." As we pored over the details of our plan, a sense of righteousness washed over me. Tate had made his choices, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. With Marlene by my side, nothing could stop us from seeking the justice we deserved. With Marlene's recovery progressing remarkably, the time had come to set our plan in motion. We would make Tate answer for his cruelty, exposing his true colors in front of those he respected most. "Are you sure you're up for this, dear?" I asked Marlene as we pored over the guest list. "We can postpone if you need more time." Her steely gaze met mine, resolution etched into every line of her face. "No more delays, Hallie. That boy needs to be taught a lesson, and I intend to be there when he gets it." I nodded, suppressing a smile at her unwavering determination. Together, we finalized the invitations for a family dinner under the guise of celebrating Marlene's miraculous recovery. But our true intentions were far more sinister. One by one, I reached out to our guests, close friends and relatives who had witnessed Tate's neglect firsthand. Their outrage at his behavior only fueled our resolve, and they eagerly agreed to attend, eager to see justice served. As the preparations unfolded, a palpable sense of anticipation hung in the air. Marlene and I worked tirelessly, ensuring every detail was perfect. The table was set with exquisite care, the meal meticulously planned, and the evidence, the damning footage and testimonies, carefully organized, ready to be unveiled at the opportune moment. Finally, the night of the dinner arrived, and our guests began to trickle in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled concern. They had no idea what was in store, but their trust in us was unwavering. As Tate strode through the door, fashionably late as always, a hush fell over the room. His eyes widened briefly at the sight of Marlene, vibrant and radiant, before his customary smirk slid into place. "Mother," he drawled, leaning in to plant a perfunctory kiss on her cheek, "you're looking well." Marlene's gaze was icy, her tone clipped. "Yes, thanks to Hallie's unwavering care and support." Tate's brow furrowed, but before he could respond, I stepped forward, my heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and righteous fury. "Shall we get started?" I gestured towards the dining table, my voice ringing with false cheer. As the meal progressed, the tension in the air was palpable. Tate regaled the guests with tales of his latest business exploits, oblivious to the scrutinizing glances darting his way. Marlene and I exchanged covert glances, our hands clasped tightly beneath the table, silently reassuring each other. Finally, as dessert was served, I cleared my throat, commanding the attention of everyone present. "Before we conclude our evening, there's something we'd like to share with you all." Tate's brow furrowed, but he remained silent, his curiosity piqued. With a slight nod from Marlene, I pressed play on the remote control, and the damning footage began to roll, bathing the room in an eerie glow. Tate's face contorted in horror as the evidence of his neglect played out for all to see, his mask of indifference shattered. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Marlene's voice, steady and resolute. "You've disappointed me for the last time, Tate." As the implications of her words sank in, Tate's veneer of composure crumbled, his true colors on full display. And in that moment, I knew our retribution was complete. The deafening silence that followed Marlene's declaration was shattered by the scraping of Tate's chair as he abruptly stood, his face contorted in rage. "How dare you?" he spat, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You're going to take the word of this woman over your own son?" Marlene's gaze remained steady, her expression unflinching. "The evidence speaks for itself, Tate. You've had countless opportunities to be there for me, but you chose your selfish ambitions instead." Tate's nostrils flared, and he rounded on me, his eyes blazing with accusation. "This is your doing, isn't it? You've been poisoning her against me from the start." Before I could respond, Marlene raised a hand, effectively silencing him. "Enough, Tate. Hallie has shown me more love and devotion than you ever have. She's the one who deserves my gratitude, not you." A murmur rippled through our guests, their expressions ranging from shock to righteous indignation. They had witnessed Tate's true colors, laid bare for all to see. Tate's gaze swept the room, his desperation palpable. "You can't all seriously believe this charade. She's manipulating you, can't you see?" But his pleas fell on deaf ears. One by one, our friends and relatives voiced their support for Marlene's decision, recounting their own experiences with Tate's neglect and indifference. As the onslaught of testimony continued, Tate's bravado crumbled, his mask of arrogance slipping away to reveal the pathetic, selfish man beneath. He slumped back into his chair, head in his hands, as the weight of his misdeeds bore down upon him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he raised his head, his eyes hollow and defeated. "Mother, please, give me another chance. I'll do better, I swear." But Marlene's resolve was unshakable. "It's too late for promises, Tate. You've made your choices, and now you must live with the consequences." With those words, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a document, sliding it across the table towards him. "These are the revised terms of my will. As of today, you have no claim to my assets or estate. Everything will be left to Hallie." Tate's eyes widened in disbelief as he scanned the pages, his face draining of color. You can't do this to me. But his protests were met with stony silence. Marlene had made her decision, and there was no turning back. As the evening drew to a close, our guests filtered out, offering words of support and congratulations. Tate remained slumped in his chair, a broken man, his world crumbling around him. Marlene approached me, her expression a mix of sorrow and resolution. It's done, Hallie. He brought this upon himself, I nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. You did the right thing, Marlene. Now we can move forward, without his toxicity weighing us down. As we surveyed the aftermath of our reckoning, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Tate had been exposed for the selfish, heartless man he truly was, and he would never again be able to hurt or neglect those he claimed to love. It was a bittersweet victory, but one that was necessary for our healing to begin. In the days following our explosive confrontation, a tense silence descended upon the house. Tate had retreated into his study, emerging only for brief periods with a haunted look in his eyes. The reality of his actions had finally caught up to him, and the consequences were devastating. I expected him to lash out, to rage against the injustice of it all, but instead he seemed defeated, a mere shadow of the arrogant man he once was. It was almost pitiable, watching him grapple with the weight of his own selfish choices. Almost, but not quite. Marlene, on the other hand, carried herself with a newfound sense of purpose. The burden of Tate's neglect had been lifted, and she was determined to make the most of her second chance at life. I want to sell the house, she announced one morning over breakfast, her voice steady and resolute. I nearly choked on my coffee. Sell the house? But this is your home. She waved a dismissive hand. It's too big for just the two of us, and it holds too many memories of. She trailed off, but the implication was clear. This place was tainted by Tate's indifference. Of course, I murmured, reaching across the table to give her hand a gentle squeeze. Whatever you want, Marlene, I'm with you every step of the way. Her eyes softened and she returned the gesture, a small smile tugging at her lips. I know, dear, and I'm grateful for that. In the weeks that followed, I set about making preparations for the sale. Tate remained holed up in his study, emerging only to half-heartedly protest our decisions before retreating once more. You can't just cut me out like this, he snarled one evening, his eyes wild with desperation. Marlene, please reconsider. I'm your son. But Marlene was unmoved, her gaze steely and unwavering. You made your choice a long time ago, Tate, and now you have to live with the consequences. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I almost felt a twinge of pity for him. Almost. As the moving date approached, I caught glimpses of Tate making furtive phone calls, his brow furrowed in concentration. I knew he was grasping at straws, searching for any legal loophole that might allow him to contest Marlene's decisions. But his efforts were in vain. Unbeknownst to him, I had already taken steps to ensure that Marlene's wishes would be carried out to the letter. With the help of a trusted attorney, we had dotted every I and crossed every T, leaving no room for Tate's interference. The day we finally loaded the last of our belongings into the moving truck, I caught Tate watching from the window of his study, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of something akin to regret cross his features. But it was too little, too late. The damage had been done, and there was no turning back. As we pulled away from the house, leaving Tate and the remnants of our former life behind, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was the end of an era, but also the beginning of something new, a future where Marlene and I could forge our own path, unburdened by the toxic presence of her neglectful son. And as for Tate, well, he would have to learn to live with the consequences of his actions, just as we had lived with the pain of his indifference for far too long. The warm summer breeze caressed my face as I stepped out onto the balcony of our new apartment, a sense of peace washing over me. It had been 6 months since Marlene and I had left the old house behind, and the change had been transformative. Hallie, dear, come take a look at this. Marlene's voice rang out from inside, filled with excitement. I hurried back into the living room, where she was beaming at me from her favorite armchair, a stack of glossy brochures in her lap. What is it? I asked, unable to contain my own smile at her infectious enthusiasm. I've been researching art classes, she explained, patting the seat beside her in invitation. There are so many wonderful options in the area, and I think it would be the perfect way for you to get back into teaching. My heart swelled with gratitude as I settled next to her, scanning the brochures with renewed interest. Teaching had been my passion before the chaos of recent years, and the prospect of returning to it filled me with a sense of purpose. These look amazing. Marlene, I murmured, squeezing her hand affectionately. Thank you for thinking of me. She waved away my thanks, her eyes sparkling with joy. Nonsense, dear. You've done so much for me. It's the least I can do to support your dreams. As we pored over the class listings, chatting animatedly about the possibilities, I couldn't help but reflect on how far we had come. The dark cloud of Tate's neglect had lifted, allowing us to bask in the warmth of our newfound freedom. In the months since our confrontation, I had barely heard from Tate. A part of me wondered if he had finally accepted the consequences of his actions, or if he was simply biding his time, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. But those thoughts were quickly pushed aside as Marlene's laughter filled the room, her energy and zest for life a constant reminder of the strength she possessed. You know, Hallie, she mused, her expression turning contemplative, I never would have had the courage to stand up to Tate if it weren't for you. I opened my mouth to protest, but she held up a hand silencing me. No, let me finish. You showed me what it truly means to care for someone, to put their needs above your own, and in doing so, you gave me the strength to take back control of my life. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I listened to her heartfelt words, overwhelmed by the depth of her gratitude. Thank you, Marlene, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, for trusting me and for giving me the chance to be a part of your family. She reached out and cupped my cheek, her touch gentle and reassuring. You are my family, Hallie, and together we've created something beautiful out of the ashes of Tate's selfishness. In that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Our bond forged through the fires of adversity and strengthened by our unwavering support for one another. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The path forward may not be easy, but with Marlene by my side, I knew we could weather any storm. And as for Tate, well, he had made his choices, and now he would have to live with the consequences, alone, without the love and support of the family he had so callously discarded. It was a harsh lesson, but one that he had brought upon himself, and in the end, his loss was our gain. A chance to start anew, to build a life filled with love, laughter, and the unbreakable bond of chosen family. The reading of my parents' will should have been a solemn occasion, but Dale's cruel laughter shattered any sense of decorum. Well, well, the good daughter loses again, he sneered, basking in the shock radiating from my face. Mr. Jennings, our family lawyer, cleared his throat uncomfortably. I understand this is a difficult situation, Lorraine, but per your parents' explicit instructions, the bulk of their estate, the investment portfolio, cash assets, and beach house is to be transferred to Dale. I struggled to process the words, a cold numbness spreading through my body. But the vineyard? Surely they left me that at least? My voice cracked with desperation. Dale barked out another harsh laugh. Are you kidding? You get the ramshackle family home and their little vanity project, that rundown vineyard that's been bleeding money for years. He leaned back smugly. I'm finally getting what I deserve after being the black sheep for so long. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd sacrificed my youth, my dreams, to be the ever-devoted daughter caring for our sick parents without complaint, all while Dale drifted from city to city, gambling away any money he could get his hands on. Mr. Jennings gave me a pitying look as he slid the paperwork across the desk. I'm so sorry, Lorraine. This was their final wish, as difficult as it is. Dale stood abruptly, already counting the windfall in his mind. Don't worry, sis. I'll keep a piece of that vineyard as a reminder of your failure. His grating laugh echoed down the marbled hallway as he sauntered out. I stared at the paperwork, the printed words swimming before my eyes. One unkind decision had erased decades of my selfless acts. The cherry on top of my imploding life, Dale inheriting the fortune while I was left with crumbs and a sinking ship of a business. Gripping the documents, I found my resolve hardening. If my parents wanted to reward the black sheep, so be it. But I would not allow Dale's greed and arrogance to render my sacrifices meaningless. With every ounce of determination, I vowed to revive the vineyard and make it thrive. My throat burned with decades of swallowed pride, but I would no longer accept being diminished and stepped on. This might be a twisted legacy, but I would honor it through my own perseverance, not for my parents, not for their misplaced faith in Dale. This revival would be for me, an act of defiant redemption against those who had ground me into the dirt for far too long. As I exited Mr. Jennings' office and strode into the sunlight, I could almost taste the bittersweet triumph of success already emerging from the soil. Dale's gloating laughter would one day be drowned out by the roar of my ultimate victory. The drive back to the rundown family home was a blur. I pulled up to the dilapidated two-story house, taking in the chipped paint and overgrown weeds choking the path. This ramshackle place was now my sole inheritance, a twisted joke. Grabbing the tattered deed, I shoved open the front door, the musty scent of decay assailing my nostrils. I surveyed the living room, my gaze landing on a dusty photo of Dale and me as children, his arm casually slung over my shoulders with that infuriatingly smug grin. A red haze washed over me, and I hurled the deed across the room, the papers scattering like fallen leaves. That arrogant bastard. The bitterness poured out in a scream of anguish. Memories came flooding back, decades of thankless servitude, while Dale blew in and out of our lives like a hurricane, leaving devastation in his wake. Yet, in the end, he reaped the rewards meant for me. Screw this! I snatched up the photo, hurling it against the wall where the glass shattered spectacularly. I won't let your betrayal break me. Fists clenched, I stormed out the back door, driven by a simmering rage. I found myself standing before the neglected vineyard, a once vibrant source of joy for my parents that had withered into a decrepit graveyard of gnarled vines and parched soil. In that moment, everything became clear. This derelict land would be my path to redemption, my middle finger to Dale and the injustices inflicted upon me. I would pour every ounce of my being into resurrecting this vineyard, not just for myself, but to spite those who had tried to bury me. I grabbed a rusted trowel lying amid the weeds and began hacking away at the tangled roots, sweat beading on my brow as I lost myself in the punishing physical labor, each swing a furious revolt against my crumbling reality. The blisters were worth it. The aching muscles a welcome distraction. I would revive this vineyard through sheer force of will, and one day Dale would choke on his perceived victory as I claimed mine. Exhaustion eventually overtook me, and I collapsed beside the first cleared vines, chest heaving. But as the sun began its descent, I felt an ember of hope flicker to life in my soul. One calloused hand brushed against the withered grapes clinging to the vines, and I knew in that moment that my life's purpose would be growing from this forsaken plot of land. No longer would I accept being disrespected and disregarded. My name was Lorraine, and by God, I would make it mean something again. The days and weeks that followed blurred into a relentless grind. My life became a singular devotion, reviving the decimated vineyard that clutched at my ragged soul like a lifeline. I awoke each dawn to the ache of protesting muscles, emerging from the decrepit family home to lose myself amidst the parched vines and hardened soil. Money drained from my meager savings at an alarming rate as I purchased fertilizers, tools, and equipment to aid in my arduous toil. More than once, well-meaning neighbors stopped by, brows creased with concern. "Lorraine, honey, maybe it's time to let this hobby farm die a dignified death," Margie tutted, wringing her hands. I straightened from where I knelt, grimacing at the protest in my lower back. "It's not a hobby, Margie." My voice was a gravely rasp, dehydrated from long hours beneath the scorching sun. "This is my life now." The old widow's eyes widened at the feverish zeal burning in my gaze before she shuffled away, murmuring a prayer under her breath. I was too far gone to care about others' opinions of my obsession. This land, this vineyard, it was all I had left. Some days, I feared madness had taken root alongside the tender green shoots finally unfurling. When the relentless summer storms rolled in, I spent hours in the muddy fields, frantically shoring up vines and pumping out the flooded irrigation trenches with a ruptured sump pump. On those nights, I curled up in the dank tool shed, clothes plastered to my shivering form, massaging cramped hands and fantasizing about Dal's face when he realized I wouldn't go down without an earth-shattering fight. The deranged laughter that burst from my cracked lips those nights likely cemented the town's perception of my spiraling descent into unhinged insanity. Nature itself seemed hell-bent on annihilating my efforts, from Cabernet devouring insects to merciless hailstorms that shredded entire trellises in minutes. Each morning after such assaults, I surveyed the damage with a hollow detachment before hurling myself at the ravaged earth to rebuild and replant, again and again. Even when funds dwindled perilously, I refused to surrender, bartering away possessions and taking demeaning jobs like scrubbing toilets to scrounge up cash to keep my makeshift operations afloat. Exhaustion became my constant companion, coupled with the obsessive drive not to let this fledgling chance at redemption wither on the vine. Some nights I curled on the ground amid the gnarled vines, spent and aching, brooding on memories of Dale's cruelties, his mocking laughter, his sneering digs at my spinsterhood while he squandered every opportunity. Those blazing coals of hatred fueled my determination to show him, once and for all, my fortitude could no longer be disregarded and crushed underfoot. From the charred ashes of my former life, a new Ani would be forged, emboldened, hardened, unstoppable. The first delicate buds appeared like gems after that brutal winter, vivid green fractals unfurling to greet the warm spring sunshine. I cradled the tender shoots in my calloused palms, a sense of awe and renewal swelling in my chest. This gritty resurrection was far from over, but those buds represented the first tangible fruits of my suffering, proof that sheer, mulish determination could defy the cruelest of circumstances. Well, if it ain't Cinderella tending to her garden. The mocking drawl instantly withered the tender buds of hope blooming within me. I snapped upright to see Dale swaggering along the neat rows, his designer loafers muddied. "Get off my land!" The words sliced from my chapped lips like shards of glass. His garish shirt, no doubt purchased with our parents' fortune, strained across his pot-belly as he brayed out a contemptuous laugh. "Your land? In case you've forgotten, little sister, I own this dirt along with everything else." In 2 strides I was inches from his sneering face, shovel-gripped white-knuckle tight. "You arrogant son of a—" Ah, Dale waggled a pudgy finger. "That's no way to talk to your benefactor, is it? After all, I've allowed you to play princess of this pathetic patch." My knuckles ached to reshape his smug features, but I refused to grant him that satisfaction. "What do you want, Dale?" I bit out each word, "just popping by to see how my charity case is coming along." His piggish eyes raked over the pristine young vines. "Though I must admit, you've done better than I expected, Lo. This actually looks like it might become profitable." A bloom of dread sprouted in my gut at the speculative gleam in his gaze. He was here to stake his claim, leeching off the seeds I had nurtured with my blood and sweat. Sure enough, he rubbed his stubby hands together like a B-movie villain. "You know, as the sole owner, I'd be well within my rights to demand a hefty percentage of any proceeds, wouldn't you agree?" Red crept into the corners of my vision. "Like hell you will." The words hissed through my clenched jaw as I took one menacing step closer, the shovel now inches from his pampered face. For a fleeting instant, Dale's bravado wavered, a glimpse of the cowering child who used to cringe from my shadow whenever I stood up to his cruelties. But the shadow soon passed, and his chin jutted out again with feigned bravado. "You watch yourself, Lo. That temper will be your downfall." His piggy eyes narrowed to slits as he leaned in, reeking of costly cologne and hubris. "Don't forget who's in control here. This is just the start, and Mama and Daddy's money has already run dry for me, thanks to some poor investments." My heart plummeted as his meaning crystallized. He would try to rip away this one chance at redemption, leeching off my triumphs like the parasite he was. But as his wheezing laughter faded into the distance, I felt that defiant spark rekindle in my soul. I clutched the tender vines to my chest, heedless of their scratching barbs. This vineyard was my life's blood, and Dale could try to steal that from my cold, dead hands. No more cowering, no more surrendering my spirit. I would bury the vindictive bastard in success so complete, so beautifully poetic, that he choked on the bitter taste of his own defeat. The weeks after Dale's crude visit passed in a blur of frantic activity. I transformed into a relentless force of nature, my every waking moment dedicated to fortifying the vineyard's defenses. Security cameras and perimeter lighting were installed. A retired police dog, a snarling beast aptly named Brutus, patrolled the fields day and night, ready to shred any intruders to ribbons on my command. I'd be damned if I'd let that weasel Dale slither in and desecrate the delicate lifeblood pulsing through these vines after all my toil. If he wanted a fight, I'd give him a war. Margie stopped by one sweltering afternoon, shielding her eyes against the blazing sun as she surveyed the vineyard's metamorphosis with poorly concealed alarm. Good heavens, Lorraine, this place looks more like a military compound than a vineyard these days. She flinched as Brutus's booming barks echoed across the fields. I gave the snarling canine's flanks an affectionate pat, unconcerned. Whatever it takes to protect my investment, I stated flatly, daring her to object. The widow's withered hand fluttered to her throat as her eyes traced the newly installed security perimeter and floodlights. But, from who, honey? This level of paranoia can't be healthy. I whirled on her, fists clenched. Years of batting away her well-meaning pity bubbled up in a surge of blistering resentment. You think this is paranoia? That bloated sack of shit who calls himself my brother seems to think he can slither in and try to steal the fruits of my sacrifice. I was nearly shouting now, nostrils flared. Well, he's got one hell of a reckoning coming if he tries. Margie's eyes widened and she took a step backwards, gripping the faded gingham of her dress. My, Lorraine, I've never seen you like this before. Then you've never seen me survive before, I growled through gritted teeth. She swallowed hard, a tremor running through her frail frame. For a moment I felt a pang of regret at my outburst, but the white-hot defiance burned away any semblance of restraint. If Margie couldn't handle this side of me, that was her loss. This was the fires of my redemption being stoked, and I would let nothing and no one douse those flames. I should go. Margie's voice was barely above a terrified whisper as she backpedaled towards her car. You do that, I called after her retreating form. And tell anyone else around here with good intentions to stay the hell away from my vineyard. The squeal of her tires seemed to punctuate the severing of her friendship, yet another casualty in this brutal, uphill battle. I felt a strange sense of lightness at having shed that anchor. No more would I pacify the mushy sensibilities of small-town busybodies too frail to embrace the ruthless self-preservation required for triumph over adversity. They could whisper and tut behind cup palms all they wanted. My vineyard stood as a bristling bulwark against their judgments, and against any further effort by my worm of a brother to leech away at my rebirth. This land was my dominion, and Dale would rue the day he drunkenly scrawled his signature on those damnable inheritance papers. A cruel smile played across my lips as I surveyed my fortified kingdom, visions of Dale's comeuppance dancing in my mind's eye like beautiful mirages. He would learn the true depths of my determination soon enough, and the reckoning would be as sweet as the first perfect batch of vintage I'd uncork in the face of his devastation. The rich, earthy aroma of the first harvest wafted through the air, sweet, tantalizing tendrils that represented years of agonizing sacrifice finally bearing fruit. I stood amid the vineyards, drinking in the scene of workers carefully snipping plump clusters from the vines, handling them like precious jewels. My jewels, battered and scarred from the turmoil that had birthed them, yet now glistening with the first radiant rays of success. Soon, the heady perfume of fermentation would permeate the air as these grapes transmuted into my vineyard's inaugural vintage. Just the thought sparked tremors of vindication. Grunting from exertion, I lifted another tub of grapes, savoring their lush weight, when a familiar nasal whine grated my senses. You just can't stop rubbing it in, can you? Dale lumbered between the rows, already sweating through his garish silk shirt from the autumn heat. I rolled my eyes but remained silent, awaiting the inevitable barrage of insults and delusional diatribes about how this triumph was rightly his. Don't give me the silent treatment, Lorraine. He spat out my name like a rotten fruit. You think you've won, but this is just the start. His meaty fists clenched and unclenched as he struggled to find the words. I felt a twinge of satisfaction that, for once, I had rendered the arrogant blowhard speechless. Well, spit it out, Dale, I goaded, unable to resist twisting the knife. Red splotches mottled his cheeks, and for a fleeting instant, I thought he might actually strike me before some shred of self-restraint kicked in. "You smug bitch," he hissed through clenched teeth. "This!" He swung his arm in an expansive, sweeping gesture at the vineyards. "All of this is mine. My inheritance." He jabbed a finger into my sternum, forcing me back a step, and I'll be damned if I let you wrest it from me after all the suffering you put our family through with your self-righteous martyr act all these years. A harsh laugh erupted from my lips before I could stop it. "Suffering? You mean the suffering caused by your gambling debts and shiftless lifestyle?" Dale's face purpled, and for a moment I thought he might spontaneously combust before he drew a couple of ragged breaths. "Whatever. The fact is, you had no legal right to all of this." He jabbed his finger again for emphasis. "No right at all." I opened my mouth, but he steamrolled over any response. "So consider this your first and only warning, sis." His fetid breath washed over me, tinged with the sourness of desperation and alcohol. "Give me what's mine, or I'll take it by whatever means necessary." Plucking a plump grape from the nearby bin, I locked eyes with him as I ground it between my fingers, savoring the burst of sweet juice and pulpy flesh. "You're right, Dale. This is rightfully yours." He blinked, clearly caught off guard by my easy agreement. Leaning in until our faces were mere inches apart, I allowed a single rivulet of purple grape essence to slowly trace down my wrist. This land, this bounty, it was all a gift from our loving parents to their favorite, most deserving child. My lips peeled back in a parody of a grin. A gift they ripped from my tenacious hands and bestowed upon their shriveled, ungrateful fuck-up of a son. Dale recoiled, nostrils flaring at the caustic venom lacing every syllable. "So by all means, come take what's yours," I purred, savoring his impotent fury. "I'll be waiting for you to try, brother dear." With that, I turned on my heel and marched away, leaving him sputtering amidst the vines slowly withering into the chill of evening. They said revenge was a dish best served cold. But years in the making, this act of vengeance would be a furious inferno of retribution, one I hoped would reduce Dale's pathetic life to smoldering ash. The guttural snarl of Brutus's barks shattered the stillness of the pre-dawn darkness. I bolted upright in bed, senses instantly alert to the bestial ferocity echoing from the vineyards. Grabbing the baseball bat beside my bed, I charged out into the inky shadows, the colossal dog's furious roars rapidly growing in volume. Halfway across the field, the floodlights activated with a blinding brilliance, revealing the horrific scene. Rows upon rows of gnarled, desiccated vines, as if a rampaging army had torn through and pillaged everything in their path. No. The strangled whisper escaped my constricted throat as Brutus's barks crescendoed in my ears. A blur of movement at the edge of the illumination snapped me back to reality. I surged forward, bat gripped in a knuckle-whitening grip, to find the dog frantically lunging and clawing at the chain-link barrier separating my land from the county road. On the other side, the terrified and unmistakable visage of Dale scrambled backwards, hands shielding his face from the frenzied canine's snapping jaws as he fled in a drunken stagger. White-hot rage propelled me forward. I slammed the release on the gate and Brutus exploded through, giving pursuit as Dale flung himself into a rusted Camaro and peeled away in a shower of gravel. "That way! Get him!" I screamed uselessly over the roar of the engine as dog and car vanished in opposite directions. My limbs moved on autopilot, carrying me deeper into the wake of unimaginable devastation. Mile after mile of healthy green vines lay desecrated, reduced to twisted, scorched husks weeping desiccated tendrils onto the furrowed soil. This was not mere sabotage, it was a holocaust, an utter annihilation of everything I'd poured my soul into resurrecting from the ashes. Yet even as bile rose in my throat, engulfed by the acrid stench of charred vegetation, an ember of hope smoldered amidst the ash. Dale had been there. His presence was proof of his culpability in this atrocity. Reinvigorated, I began meticulously documenting the carnage with my phone, capturing every scrap of evidence from discarded cigarette butts to the boot prints seared into the parched earth by the inferno that had clearly raged here. By the time the first fingers of dawn crept over the horizon, hours had passed, but I'd assembled an unshakable case to unleash the full force of justice upon Dale's miserable hide. The county sheriff arrived with his deputies in tow just as I finished, expressions grim as they surveyed the apocalyptic scene. His face took on a sickly pallor at the extent of the wanton destruction. Then his gaze met mine, puffy and rimmed with soot, and understanding crept in. "Ma'am, was this—" I silently handed over my phone gallery with the timeline of evidence. The lawman's jaw clenched, giving a solemn nod before barking orders to seal off the area and coordinate with local arson investigators. His tone brooked no argument. This crime scene demanded nothing less than a full-scale, interagency call-out. Hours later, swaddled in a shock blanket as crews tromped through the devastated fields, I felt the familiar warm weight of Brutus's head on my knee. Meeting his doleful gaze, I gently stroked his cobbled fur. "I will find who did this, girl," I murmured, soaked in the stench of my adversary's despicable handiwork. "And when I do, I'll bury those demons in justice so searing, hell itself will look like a cool breeze." With those words, new fires of resolve ignited in the smoldering remains of my charred soul. This act of annihilation would not be Dale's victory, but the powder keg flashpoint that finally consumed his worthless existence in divine retribution. One way or another, reckoning would have its day. The heavy thunk of the gavel seemed to reverberate through my very bones as the judge leveled his stern gaze at the shackled form of Dale. "In light of the overwhelming evidence against you, including DNA samples from the crime scene, eyewitness testimony, and your own sloppy attempts at an alibi, this court finds you guilty." My hands clenched the bench, knuckles whitening as I awaited the words I'd yearned to hear. "Of arson, criminal mischief, and destruction of property and assets exceeding $5 million. You are hereby sentenced to 20 years in a state penitentiary, with possibility of parole after serving 18. A ragged gasp escaped Dale's trembling lips, the color draining from his ruddy face as the reality crashed over him. 20 years. A veritable life sentence for the sack of bloat who'd squandered every opportunity with reckless depravity. My lips peeled back in a feral grin as his haunted gaze found mine. I held it, letting the burning retribution in my stare bore into his crumbling facade before giving the slightest shake of my head. The realization that this systematic immolation was just the opening salvo in his world unraveling washed over Dale in crashing waves. He recoiled, mouth moving soundlessly as the bailiff swarmed, wrenching his flabby arms behind his back and marching him away forever. The tang of justice had never tasted so intoxicatingly sweet. As the courtroom emptied, I remained seated, savoring the silence and letting the weight of this culmination settle in my core. After so many years of anguish, desolation, and scorching the earth with my rage, the cycle of anguish had finally transcended. Exhaustion quickly followed, leaving me hollowed yet strangely at peace. I was free from the trauma and familial shackles that had stifled my potential for far too long. Fresh beginnings had been a bitter, uphill battle, but the summit was finally in sight. A warm weight on my shoulder startled me, and I glanced over at Eric, my lawyer and steadfast ally these past brutal months. "Congratulations, Lorraine." His words were a low rumble, heavy with understanding of how momentous this victory resonated. "The justice you fought for is finally served." I opened my mouth to offer platitudes of thanks, but Eric raised his hand, quieting me. "But my work here isn't done quite yet, not if you'll have me." He plucked a sealed manila envelope from his briefcase and extended it toward me. "This is the next step in your reckoning." Brow furrowing, I accepted the parcel, giving it an experimental shake. Something shifted inside with a faint clink of glass on glass. At Eric's nod of approval, I cracked the seal and slid out a sleek, elegant bottle filled with a ruby liquid that could only be one thing, the debut vintage of my vineyard's revival, still aging to perfection even after the devastation. My breath caught as I cradled the vessel, tracing the embossed label with a reverent fingertip. So much sacrifice, so much torment, crystallized into this humble glass flask, my greatest achievement and Dale's greatest downfall. "By all means," Eric murmured. "You've earned this moment more than anyone I know." With a trembling hand, I twisted the cork free and brought the bottle to my lips, throwing my head back as I allowed the first sublime mouthful to roll over my tongue and awaken every sense. The rich, mature body with hints of dark fruit and smoke blossomed in rapturous waves, setting my palate alight. This was ambrosia, the sweetest, most decadent nectar I could ever conceive. But beyond the taste was something deeper, more visceral and elemental: joy, redemption, and a profound, lingering bitterness that transcended mere flavors. This was the taste of vengeance finally achieved, served ice-cold and brimming with the ashes of Dale's miserable, pathetic existence. Essence of Rictus grinned as this potent revelation surged through me. After decades of oppression and torment, the ultimate karma had blossomed from the soils I'd watered with my tears and sweat, justice and deliverance personified in liquid form. I would savor each and every delectable drop, letting it anoint me while bathing in the glorious retribution I had seized for myself. Every time I uncorked a bottle, I would toast to Dale's demise and my hard-won rebirth. This was the first draught of many to come from the cup of long-delayed redemption I had harvested with my own 2 hands. And oh, how ruddy and bountiful those fruits tasted upon my lips.